retain. The learning.
Don't you think that not exactly the learning, but the way that we transfer the knowledge, the trainer has in his mind, and that to the trainee.
Right.
Is it not?
It is.
That the procedure should be such that the same thing should be transferred from one mind to the other mind in the same way.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
that procedure that these things are.
Absolutely. So you are Xeroxing it, and in Xeroxing what happens? First it is being scanned, and then it is being printed. Right? So first, what the trainer is saying, whatever is in my mind, I am expressing it. That is my output. Then you are perceiving what I am expressing.
That has to come to the mind.
In your mind. So how will it come to your mind? First you have perceived it. You have perceived it through visual and through audio. So through your ears and your eyes, you have perceived what I am trying to say. And in your mind, you are processing it. You are thinking about it. And what is the outcome of that thinking is what you retain, what you take away from here, what remains with you. That is your learning, what you have retained. This process is agreed to by everyone? Okay.
Probably reception, then it is perception, based on
See, when we say perceive, when I am saying perceive here and what you are calling as reception is, we are meaning the same thing. It is just the word play. When I am saying perceive, one is, when I am saying perceive is to receive something using your senses. That I am calling perceive. Whereas what you are thinking of perceive is to think. Right? Yeah. So we are.
Perceive is related to thinking.
It is.
It is related, the word is related to thinking.
It is. But here, when we are saying perceive here means that you are input, receiving information, sensing something. Okay, I'll give you an example. How do you perceive by feeling and thinking? There are two ways in which you perceive, just two ways. First is by feeling and second is by thinking. When I say feeling, I don't mean emotional feeling. I mean physically feeling. Right? And
that is reception.
Reception. Right?
When we combine it with thinking.
Yes, it is perception. You're right. But when I say that I am perceiving something by feeling, that means I am using one of my senses. Touch, sight, sound, smell. Right? I am using one of those senses to perceive something. And when I perceive something by thinking, okay, I'll give you an example. Okay, there is a candle here. There is a lit candle here with a big flame. Okay, when you look at the flame, what do you perceive? Light. What do you perceive about the temperature of that flame? Is it hot or cold? Hot. How have you perceived it? You have not gone and touched it. You have by experience. So you have perceived the heat by thinking. Right? Whereas if a small child comes, what will he go? He will go and touch it. And then his hand will get burnt. So he has perceived the heat by feeling. So there are the two ways in which it can be perceived.
First time it is feeling, and later on it is the thinking.
Thinking. Maybe may not be. In this example, yes. But otherwise, then that is by thinking. So you are perceiving either by feeling or by thinking. Right? And you are processing by doing or watching. What is the difference between perceiving and processing? Perceiving is receiving that initial information, and processing is information that you have already received, you are processing it in your mind. I tell you that, this paint is wet. Right? I have told you that. Now, how are you processing that information? Either by doing, that is again, by going and touching it, or by watching. It appears to be wet, smell aa raha hai, paint ka, or you watch someone else going and touching it. So, while the process is the same, when I am touching it and feeling, but it is that, where is that information? Is it in the perceiving stage or in the processing stage? That is the difference. So you perceive by feeling and thinking, you process by doing and watching. Any questions about this? Any doubts about this? Yes, sir.
Processing. When you are speaking to us, perceive that is okay. The processing part, physically, what we are doing and watching. What are the two components? How do you explain?
It is either or, right? Okay. When I come to the next 2 slides, it will become a little more clearer, right? We'll. Okay. So this watching is also called reflective observation. So you are reflecting on it. Doing is active experimentation. No, not in your brain. When you are processing it, like I said, I told you this wall is wet. How do you process that information? Either you touch it, or you watch someone, or you watch the evidences. Yes, ma'am? Okay. So now, if this is learning, what do you understand by learning style? How do you learn? How do different people differ in learning? What do you understand by learning style?
Quick learner.
That I will not call that style. That is ability. That goes into an ability domain. Learning style.
Some learners going to a workshop and some by watching the videos or
Right.
maybe the online material, reading through it.
Right.
Video.
Right.
Learning by doing, do it yourself. Kids.
Learning by doing.
Doing discussion.
This-
Group discussion.
Okay. So essentially, what everyone is talking about is that different people learn in different ways. Right? They have different ways of learning. So this everyone knows. I mean, right? This is something we've known. Someone writes and learns. Someone mugs it up. Exam se pehle, ratta maar lete hain. Someone likes to watch and learn. Someone likes to listen and learn. Right? So different people learn differently, that we know. Now, when different researchers have, defined these learning styles, they have done it in different ways. So the basic way that someone initially defined learning styles was by visual, auditory, kinesthetic learners. You must have heard of these terms, that visual learning, auditory learning, or kinesthetic, learning by doing, learning by watching, learning by listening. Right? So initially someone said that there are 3 types of learners. There are visual learners, there are auditory learners, and there are kinesthetic learners. So that was fine. But if you look at it very carefully, what part of the learning process is this addressing, this learning style? Perceiving. It is dividing learners on the basis of which they perceive. Right? Then there is another gentleman called Dr. David Cobb. He said that if the process is perceive and process, if the learning process or method is perceive and process, then we should refine this definition of learning style by including the way people process information also. So he said that there are 2 ways in which people perceive information, that is by feeling and thinking, and there are 2 ways by which they process information, by doing and watching. So therefore there became 4 combinations. I'll explain. So let's say this is perceive. This is the graph of people who perceive in different ways. On the bottom is people who perceive by thinking. And he named it as abstract conceptualization. Means you have conceptualized something in your mind. This heat of the flame is not a physical experience to you, it's a concept that is there in your mind. So at one end of the spectrum are people who perceive by thinking. At the other end of the spectrum are people who perceive by feeling. Now it is a preference, it is an internal thing. Some people prefer to perceive by thinking, some people prefer to perceive by feeling. No one will be at either ends. 100% of the time, you will not perceive everything by just thinking. In certain situations, you will also maybe like to feel. For example, suppose there is a new dish, a very interesting dish. You go to a restaurant and someone tells you, this is how it is made and this is how it is. Would you like to taste it and find out, or by that description or by that will you be able to visualize or conceptualize that taste? You have to taste it. So it's not that anyone who likes to perceive by thinking will always perceive by thinking. So you, depending on your preference, you will lie somewhere on this line, depending on to which side you are biased. Similarly, if this is the graph for processing information, you will lie somewhere on this line. So what Kolb did, Dr. David Kolb, he combined these two and he divided the world into 4 types of people. People who perceive by feeling and process by watching. People who perceive by feeling and process by doing. People who perceive by thinking and process by watching. People who perceive by thinking and process by doing. So these are the 4 different types of learning styles as per David Kolb. So he gave them all a name. He called them diverger, assimilator, converger, accommodator. Right. Now we need not go into further detail as far as this is concerned. Needless to say that suppose we say that there are 4 different types of learners. Now as a trainer, you are also one type of learner. You may be somewhere in out of these 1, 2, 3 or 4, one will be your learning style, right? And in your class, amongst your participants, you will have people of all 4 learning styles. Law of averages. By law of averages, you will have how much percent of each style? 1/4, 25%. 25% you will have of each style. Now, what happens? Natural tendency is whatever is my learning style, I prefer to teach in that way also. You agree? That is natural tendency. So therefore, if you do that, what is the percentage of your participants that are learning effectively? 25%, 1/4. What is happening to the balance 75%? It is not that they are not learning at all. It is not that they are not learning at all, but their learning is not as effective as of those 25% who are of your own learning style. So what should you do? Mix it. You should be aware that there are 4 different types of learners, and you should be able to meet the needs of all these 4 different types of learners. And if you can meet them, then the effectiveness of your training goes up from how much to how much? 25% to 100%. Of course, you may not have 100% effectiveness, but it is a substantial difference. You are at least addressing everyone, right? So how do you do that? It's easy to talk in theory that we should address all 4 types. How do you do that?
Multiple ways.
Sorry?
Use multiple ways of teaching, like pictures, videos.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Multiple ways of teaching. Right? What else? So, sorry?
Add more of, when you're, for good listeners, you can add more of your own experiences.
Right.
Visualize this kind of techniques.
Right. Okay. So what see, I have just abbreviated this so that for the basic understanding. What Kolb said thereafter, he listed what are the characteristics of all these types of learners, and he said how they can be mixed and matched. But the essence of that was that out of each of these learners, there is one question which is on top of their minds. There is one type of learner who says, I want a reason. Why? That is the question that they want to know the most. The second wants to know what. I want to know the content. There is a third who wants to try it out. How? How does this happen? And the fourth wants to directly apply it. What if? So, if we have to meet the needs of all these four, in every session, in every training program, we must make sure that we are answering these four questions. Why, what, how, and what if. How to do it, we'll talk about it tomorrow. Practically, how are you going to apply this? We are going to talk about it tomorrow, that how are you going to structure your session so that you can answer these questions. Needless to say, just to understand here that these are the four key questions that we need answered in any session. Why do we want them answered is to cater for all the